Hello, everyone. And Professor Chidi Odinkalu has once again written an op-ed, and this time it's titled Tinubu's Taxing Times by Chidi Anselm Odinkalu. Uh, Profe- Professor Odinkalu is one person who is so knowledgeable, and one person who you say him has such vast knowledge about the history of Nigeria. And it's always a pleasure, watching him and hearing him. And it's one person who is a fighter also. You come after him, he will go after you. Yes, on Wiki has been learning the hard way what it is to take on, Professor Chidi Odinkalu. So I'm just going to look at this and just let's read this together. For me, I haven't read this article. It's an opportunity to read it and learn from it, and I hope you also get that learning also. He says, a mere 4 years after emerging from a civil war in 1974, Nigeria was at the beginning of an oil boom. Then, as today, the country was in the middle of the debate about fiscal federalism and revenue allocation. Unlike today, however, there were significant differences. The country was under military rule, and the men leading the debate were all soldiers. In the 50 years since then, the structure of this debate and the geopolitical symmetries that define it have evolved only a little. Can you imagine? In the 50 years, a nation has evolved only a little, and in so many places has even regressed. Such a shame. The immediate spark for the debate 50 years ago was the publication of the statutory allocations to the 12 states of the Federation then for the fiscal year of 1974 to 1975. With a population of 2.5 million, Midwest State received 139.9 million naira, or 23.7% of the allocation. Rivers State, whose population was 1.5 million, received 101.1 million naira. Isawa Ilegu, semi-official biographer of Yakubu Gowon, the army general who was Nigeria's military head of state at the time, observed about this that while both Rivers and Midwestern states, comprising 7.3%, 4 million of the country's total population, shared between themselves 14.83% of the total allocation to the states, the 10 other states, which accounted for 92.7%, that's 51.6 million of the country's population, shared amongst themselves 59.17% of the statutory allocation. Usman Farouk, the commissioner of police who governed the northwestern state, was unhappy with the dissension over the sharing of the allocation, because he said all of them in the Supreme Military Council then agreed it. Joseph Gomwak, another commissioner of police and the military governor of Gowon's own Benue Plateau state, and Jacob Eswene, who governed the southeastern state, called for a more objective system of revenue allocation. If they knew that such a system looked like, they didn't say. Kwara's military governor David Bamigboye, as well as General Abba Kyari of the Northeast, went on record to call for a review of the allocation formula. For their part, Oluwole Rotimi and Mobolaji Johnson, military governors respectively of the Western and Lagos states, advocated for a revenue allocation formula that would guarantee responsible and stable government for Nigeria. Nigeria's search for a workable federalism in many ways can be reduced to the search for precisely such a formula. It has proved elusive. If anything, it may have got even more so. In the 36 years between 1946 and 1980, spanning the colonial and post-colonial periods and including military as well as elected civilian regimes, the country burned through the report of at least 8 blue ribbon panels on the question of fiscal federalism. On the eve of independence in 1958, the report of Reisman Commission recommended the creation of the Distributable Pool Account (DPA), into which was to be paid 30% of revenue from mineral rents and royalties from import duties. The regions retained 50% of the revenue from mineral rents and royalties from their region, while the central government took 20%. 70% of the revenue from import duties went to the central government. 6 years later, and 4 years after independence, the Beans Fiscal Commission increased the DPA share of the income from import duties from 30 to 35% at the expense of the share of the central government. Importantly, the report set its face against the principle of derivation, replacing it with that it called the principle of financial comparability. On this basis, it recommended the sharing of the DPA receipts as follows: Northern region 42%, Eastern region 30%, Western region 20%, and Midwestern region 8%. Lagos was then the federal capital. Up to this point, the fiscal balance largely favored the regions who contributed resources to the central government. In 1968, Nigeria's post-colonial crisis of state legitimacy that already exploded into a year-long civil war. Under pressure from both the economic cost of the war as well as its structural antecedents, Yakubu Gowon, the wartime supreme commander as he was then called upon Chief I.O. Dina, a former history lecturer at the University College Ibadan, to lead what the regime called an interim revenue allocation review commission. The legacy of the Dina Committee recommendations was very far-reaching and suited the regimental mood of the military. The committee addressed frontally the issue of taxation and public goods. It recommended a centralization of taxation as well as the harmonization of the produce marketing boards, which were until then mostly regional. Hope you are following. It's quite interesting. I love to learn. The Dina Committee also recommended a centralization of the funding of higher education and the replacement of the DPA with what it called a state joint account. Additionally, the committee recommended that states should retain 100% of rent from onshore extractive operations on the basis of derivation and also received another 10% of royalties revenue as derivation. Even in the midst of an existential conflict at the time, the first that followed in the wake of the Dina Committee report was deafening. Officially, the federal military government rejected the Dina Committee report. In reality, Isawa Eliagu recalls that Gowon did not raise doors over the issue, but quietly implemented most aspects of this report through the back door at the appropriate time. The result is that the Dina Committee report has been quite influential in shaping Nigeria's version of federalism. Gowon enjoyed three advantages at the time in his handling of the unitarian tendencies that underpinned the recommendations of the Dina Committee. First, the Civil War was an extenuating circumstance. Second, the regimental traditions of the military government limited the degree of elite dissension. Third, as a military ruler, he ultimately did not have to suffer any institutional constraints similar to those imposed by parliament or its equivalent under elected civil rule. For the current incumbent, 50 years later, a civilian seeking to accomplish what would be the most far-reaching restructuring of Nigeria's fiscal fundamentals in 110 years, none of these advantages exist and he suffers many more debilitations besides. By some coincidence, in the year that Gowon constituted Dina Committee, the celebrated Kenyan political scientist Ali Mazrui explained the challenges of structural stability in post-colonial African states in terms of two underlying crises of state legitimacy and of regime legitimacy. Fiscal reform, on the ambition envisaged by the proposals now under consideration in Nigeria, assumes the existence of a capable state which enjoys affinity among citizens, an overwhelming percentage of whom should be documented. None of these can be taken for granted in Nigeria. The evidence from across the fields of financial inclusion, electoral participation, and taxation suggests that the proportion of documented Nigerians does not exceed 40%. It will take more than a few convenient ebullitions to address this. Any government will be challenged in addressing it. An administration that suffers from manifest issues of legitimacy lacks the currency to trade with in this situation. The crisis that afflicts the current proposals is that of a government unwilling to put in the work required to redress deficit of state and governmental legitimacy around the country, to address what is evidently a political problem. The government has chosen instead to escape into self-inflicted technocratic gobbledygook. Fiscal governance and reform is not as complex as the administration and its mouthpieces would like to suggest. Taxation is more than mechanical computation. It is a centerpiece of social compact between the state and its citizens. With considered inadvertence, the administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu has done itself a world of good by inspiring this increasingly raucous or chaotic or loud debates about the state of that compact in Nigeria or the lack of it. It will be best served by listening to the debate in humility while it learns. And it says, a lawyer and a teacher, Odinkalu, can be reached at chidi.odinkalu@tufts.edu. This is what he has to say on the current tax reform that is going on. Like I've always said earlier, it's something I know nothing about. I read and I learn, and I hope in one way or the other you also learned something. Thank you so much for watching up to this stage. If you did, I appreciate you. I appreciate it. Bye.